So one of the things that seems appropriate to speak about in this video is some new insight that's starting to come up around the experience of what's repressed or what is hidden. And it's important to start to recognize that really in our experience, even though perceptively things seem to be obscured or somehow hidden, that in reality, that our repression is actually an illusion, that the experience of repressing something is actually a kind of a subconscious complicity. And as we begin to explore all of the layers of this, as we explore thoughts and we use some self-inquiry and we begin to explore sensations and the senses, we start to realize that we don't actually have a lack of access to our subconscious experience. What we really find there is a type of thought that is really binary. We find a type of thought that is basically saying yes and no to experiences. And we find that usually associated with some sort of sensation that we've already deemed unworthy or uncomfortable or painful. So in this video, we will be speaking to the simple truth that really nothing is hidden. It's all right here. It's all accessible. And that repression itself is actually illusory, and it requires some complicity in our behavior. This illusion of repression requires us to essentially take certain actions to essentially keep that out of the forefront of our experience, at least perceptively. And going back to a metaphor that seems to be the case is the way the mind seems to work is through this, the nature of what seems to be focus is, if we were to reframe what focus truly is, what we're essentially doing is becoming fixated on an aspect of an experience and rejecting the rest of that experience. That would be a focus. We're essentially attempting to maybe intellectually or perceptively hone in on a certain tiny aspect of something and rejecting the rest, becoming essentially a muted experience. So one of the things we can do to play with this is begin to play with the periphery of that focus, the periphery of that experience. And what we begin to find is that thoughts tend to arise as these objects that are in a very tight focus, and whatever seems to be on the periphery of those thoughts, we tend to reject. In our very human experience itself, as these thoughts arise, they tend to take a focus, and the sensations that are there also tend to live on the periphery of those thoughts in our perception, and we tend to reject them. We can also see this in our visual field if we decide to explore in that way. Maybe covered this in a video previously, but we can do it again, where right here, right now, if you allow your eyes to stay focused on the screen and you don't turn your head or move your eyes, you will notice that there is a significant amount of information in this ring of peripheral in your vision. You will see a lot of information there if you just relax and you bring attention to those spaces. And even if your mind has a sense of what lives in that periphery, you will start to see that you actually cannot verify it right here, right now, without turning your head or moving your eyes that direction. You can see shapes. You can see something that might be an object. You can see colors, but you can't be absolutely sure that what is being seen in the periphery is what the mind is telling you that it is. The mind will give you probably in your space right here, right now, it'll probably give you a sense of a modeling. It'll attempt to convince you of what it is, but that can only live in thought and imagination. In your direct experience of your peripheral vision right here, right now, you actually cannot be certain what it is, but still something there. This is a metaphor in the visual field, a powerful metaphor in the visual field of all aspects of periphery. There seems to be a periphery of everything, a periphery of thought, of smell, of taste, of touch, of body sensations, and so on. And that periphery becomes more clear as we begin to explore and we move away from that tight focus, that aperture that seems to close in thought and in what we experience as a focus. Now, by no means is this an intention to reject single-pointed focus approaches or anything along those lines. Those can also have a lot of value because we begin to see that this zooming in and this zooming out aspect of things begins to reveal what seems to live on the edges of our experience. as we become single-pointed in our approach, we start to see the way that the mind begins to offer up other alternatives to our experience, and that by itself can start to reveal something. But for this particular approach, what we're really looking at is in our experience itself and what seems to arise sensationally and what seems to be sensed initially, how does thought then impart some sense of disassociation, some sense of distraction, or some sense of moving away through a narrowing of an aperture? And that's where we'll begin to see that there is nothing in our experience that is actually repressed. We are actually mostly intentionally moving away from something that we've already deemed to be uncomfortable. And so if you really want to get at the core of what seems to be trauma, if you really want to get at the core of what seems to be repressed, we start to move toward these initial experiences that may take a particular context of discomfort or pain or something that seems undesirable. It seems like everything in our experience is right here, right now. And if you play a simple game of just in this very instant, resting with a sense of attention in your senses, bring attention into the visual field, what is being seen, what is being heard, what is being felt, what is being tasted, touched, or sensations here in the trunk, all of it. Just bring attention to the edge of your skin and see if right here, right now, in this moment, that you can find in the senses where there is no attention. And just sit with that for a little bit. Where is there no attention? And as we begin to naturally move, we find that attention seems to be spontaneous and immediate in value here. We don't actually have to have any sense of agency. There's just almost a random, spontaneous awareness of our senses. And in that, we find that attention must be there because it's ringing, it's gathering, it's bringing something to the forefront of the experience. And maybe this will start to lead to more curiosity, that maybe there is nowhere where there is no attention, or maybe attention is everywhere all the time. And if we're able to sense that in some way, is there ever actually a time we're not able to sense that? Or is there basically a perceptive aperture that closes and we've become accustomed to somehow ignoring that or shutting off our ability to become aware of that? That becomes really interesting in its own exploration. And so what we begin to see is that now the mind will create something along the path that'll say that there's something to attain, or there is something that is hidden, or there is something that is secretively, mysteriously hiding underneath this experience. But maybe that's actually not the case. Maybe there's nothing hidden. Maybe there's nothing that is hiding or being obscured, or maybe there's nothing that is beyond this right here, right now. We couldn't verify that anyway. That has to be a thought. And right there, you will start to see a very primary doubt that's attempting to reject this experience for something else, for something that's underneath the surface, for something that's down the road in this futurization, for this sense of realization that is somehow out of our reach. But maybe this is the realization, just the simple resting in where attention is. And if we can't find where there is no attention, maybe that vacuum of experience doesn't exist, and then it begins to reveal what the mind is really doing. And this is where it gets interesting too, is that the mind seems to be creating a negation of experience. Something arising, and then it gaslights us into attempting to reject that experience. Something that's already here by the time we realize it, and then we attempt to modify or change it or somehow compartmentalize it and make it become something else. But maybe the experience already speaks for itself and it cannot be touched in such a way. Maybe that's our truest nature in that exact way. Maybe that's the nature of reality in all things and all emptiness as well. And here's where it gets also interesting, is that we can't actually objectify the everythingness. We can't actually objectify, without actually putting effort into it, any aspect of our sensing. We basically have to have a reflective moment to do so. But in the very instant of our sensing, in the very instant of our realization or experience, it's already spoken for itself. Time begins to collapse here. space begins to collapse here. And even more interestingly, our sense of agency begins to collapse here. We find that agency, time, space, these things seem to be intertwined and all dependent on a sense of reflection, a sense of evaluation, or a sense of being able to somehow modify the experience that is already done. It's already here. So maybe there is nothing that's actually repressed. Maybe we don't have to resign ourselves to being complicit in these things. And basically, we can even start to chalk this up to an inquiry that we can play with. What wants to remain hidden? What wants to hide? And as we begin to approach that, we see that we start to get these glimpses or these tastes of something that seems to be always here, but there's an effort to hide it or obscure it or somehow move away from it. And that is where we let our curiosity take over. And as we become more narrow in that experience, as it becomes a little bit more dense or intense, if that's the case, that's where we engage this other aspect of our authenticity that we just call courage. We just stay with it anyway as thoroughly as possible. We play, we toggle the edges, we look for the boundaries, we look for the center. We see if it only lives in a location and what is perceived to be the body. We see if it maybe is everywhere all the time. So, just to be really clear, repression is just a perceptive experience. There is nothing that can actually be repressed. And I'm really just encouraging you to start taking a look at your experience and just noticing these aspects of things that want to stay hidden. And one way that we can start to pry the edges, and this is a pretty powerful pointing, is stepping into a very profound sense of honesty, at least within our own experience. We can start to practice that externally in our relationships, but to get to such a pristine sense of honesty that even the pettiness of what we want or don't want starts to become interesting enough to engage, because we tend to want to disregard these things. We tend to bypass, and anything that we're bypassing, we are essentially becoming complicit and hiding. So honesty will be a crucial aspect of this. Honesty in this experience. And sometimes that can, as mentioned before, show up in the way that we're honest with others and are honest in other situations. That can start to pry the edges enough that it becomes more apparent for us. Whatever we hide out here with others, we tend to hide here within our own experience. So, what wants to stay hidden? Is there anything actually repressed? Is there anything actually beyond reach? Is there anything that's actually mysterious to the point where we don't sense it at all, that we cannot attain? Because it does seem like the mystery is something that we really can't fairly and honestly objectify, but it also seems like it's completely ubiquitous and already here in a myriad of all these experiences that we would just call the objects of form, the expressions of that which is showing up in form. These perceived external objects, these thoughts are objectified. Even our sensations are somewhat objectified, but as we begin to explore them in a more direct manner, we find that we cannot know what they are, so it does have a mysterious quality, but it seems to be here nonetheless. Maybe that is probably the most modern way to describe emptiness. Something here, we just don't know what it is. Something that we know very clearly, we just don't know what it is. Something that seems to be the essence of all experiences, we just don't actually know what it is. Is anything actually really repressed? Is anything actually hidden? Is anything actually hiding underneath this, something in these layers of exploration? Is there anything down the road that you can possibly attain or experience that isn't already the case here and now? And what I would posit for you is that can't be the case without a thought. There is nothing else. It's only here. It is only this, just like this. Let all of these experiences, no matter how mundane or uncomfortable, let all of these things right here, right now, be the portal. Let them be the guide, and it will become rather clear. And as you go, you'll start to find maybe a sense of restlessness at the base of this, something that is essentially commanding or desperately begging you to do something about this, but maybe you don't have to do anything. You can just rest in that intensity of simply being. And from there, it seems to start to take care of itself. Is anything repressed? Do you need to find anything? Do you actually even need to find what's hidden? Or can that inquiry of what is hidden or what wants to remain hidden, can that just bring something that you already know into the forefront of your experience? Because the truth is, you actually already fundamentally know what wants to be hidden. And if it seems like something trivial and trite initially, use that and exploit that to follow the breadcrumbs, and you will begin to find something more as you go. Don't worry about it. It doesn't have to have a grand flavor. It can be very, very small, but if it does stand out, that's good enough. Trust this to reveal what it is. It's basically always showing you something. Right here, right now, it is showing you something. Even the right here, right now is just a concept, but in this experience, right as you're hearing these words, you're noticing something. You are noticing something. Maybe you're noticing a sense of not being sure. Maybe you're noticing a sense of wanting to intellectually understand exactly what's being said before you engage. That right there is what wants to be hidden. That there's something to engage with. You're noticing that, but something that's giving you a prerequisite to that. That's interesting. So play with this a little bit. See how it goes. Really curious to see how this develops for all of you. This particular pointing seems to help us go into an immediate experience that can be quite profound. And my sense here is, along with some of the other videos that have been recent, that this will help bring a lot of you to a pinnacle of something that seems to be the moon itself. These are all just fingers pointing to the moon. And of course, you are the moon. Your experience is the moon. You are always surrounded and immersed in this moon that we're speaking to. It's a powerful metaphor. And if it seems like you're reaching in an untenable place or you're starting to encounter the negotiations of the mind, that's a good place to be, because this is where things start to reach a place where they seem like they resolve in some way. And just to keep in mind, it's not really that there's resolution. It's just that the question of the identity, which is always living in a question, a sense of a density, or a sense of reference, or a sense of exclusion, it starts to resolve or recognize that there is no resolution in the way that it thinks, and it begins to let go. In that experience, we step into something more effortless altogether, and that can become quite profound and really life-changing, because we start to recognize that this apparent life is free of consequence. There is no consequence here. There's only a consequence in the game, in the constraints of what we think this is all about. And that is where freedom arises, that you are already liberated, that you are already free, and you have begun to realize that. So definitely would love to hear some questions. Your comments and all these things are always welcome, and maybe this will help you essentially reach the quote-unquote edge of this experience, which is essentially where you want to reside until it just takes you. And as always, thank you for being here and sharing this with me, and look forward to our next meeting.